I wonder if I asked you, what do you want to be free from? What would you most like to be free from in your life? What you would say. Maybe some of you would say, I wish I could be free from the limitations and constraints of my parents and the constraints they impose on me. Maybe it's, I wish I could be free from my degree. I wish I could be free from having every week to churn out another essay, to get to those lectures, to get up at 7:30 or whatever it is to get to lectures on time. Maybe, Mel, you've thought of the last few weeks, I wish I could be free of this English weather and just having to wear all these extra clothes. Maybe you've struggled with health and think, I wish I could just be free from the limitations that my body imposes upon me. From maybe struggles with mental health and anxiety. I wish I could be free from those things. I don't know if you noticed while we were discussing our opening question, there was a song playing, I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free by Nina Simone. And that kind of sums up one of the biggest kind of desires and drives that we have as humans. We have this desire, this drive for freedom. Two of the biggest kind of political earthquakes of the last few years have happened, to some extent, along lines of freedom. So Brexit, to a large extent, has been about freedom from the EU, freedom for Britain to define itself and to set our own rules and to run our own lives. To some extent, I think the US election a couple of years ago was partly about freedom. People who, they wanted to be free from big government, free from the control of these kind of elites who were corrupt in their eyes. Freedom matters to us. It really matters. And I think in a lot of ways, this freedom is kind of like one of the baseline things in our culture. What we most want, what we most desire, what we most value is to be free, to not be constrained. And that has done a huge amount of good. To think about someone like Nina Simone, think about, as a woman, what it would mean for her to look back at the past, and even in her own time, to think, what are the freedoms that women have been given that they didn't have? Maybe freedoms that she would say women didn't have that they still needed to have. Look at her heritage and think how much freedom was denied and how much good has come from the idea that people should be free, shouldn't be constrained, shouldn't be owned by other people. It's been a good thing in our society, the idea that we should be free. And it's something that as Christians we agree with. Freedom is a good thing. But when it comes to the question we were thinking about at the beginning, doesn't Christianity limit my freedom? Suddenly, freedom seems to be against Christianity. You hear people say things like, I would be a Christian, but that would have constrained me too much. Or people would say things like, I just think we should be free to live as we want without being constrained by the opinions of other people or by any kind of holy book or religion telling me what to do. In that narrative, religion is a negative thing because it takes away my freedom. It says I can't live in certain ways. Maybe the idea of God as someone who wants to ruin my fun, maybe he doesn't love me. He wants to constrain my life and take away my freedom. I just want to think about this for a few minutes and think, is that true? Does Christianity take away your freedom? And is our idea of freedom as a culture, is that correct? So if we move on, there's this guy called Dale Kuenhenhenhenhen, how you say that. He's written a book about what he calls the I world, and that's like the things that we believe today about life and culture. And he said the I world, that's like now, makes individual freedom its non-negotiable value. So the thing we are most looking for is to express and assert our freedom and individuality, and anything that gets in the way of that is bad and should be knocked down. So he would say, and I think I agree with him, that is the kind of highest value for our world at the moment. So the maximum freedom will always be the maximum good, the maximum happiness. That's what he's saying. I don't think that plays out if you look at the history of the West over the past 50 years or so. Look at the sexual revolutions. And a part of that, at least, was the idea that we need to be free from the constraints of traditional relationship structures. We need to be free from that, and that would be a good thing for us. You see it, I think you see it, in some of the current debates and political battles around gender, or something like the right to die. So the idea that even constraints of who we are as people are negative things that we need to get rid of. Or constraints about being constrained to life when what I want to do is die. That would be a negative thing. Now, I'm not commenting on those things right now particularly. I'm just saying we see this desire for freedom plays out in a lot of ways in our culture at the moment. The message is, don't allow anything to constrain you. Maximum freedom is maximum life. I just want to suggest a few things to think about there that maybe push against that a little bit. First of all, I think it's our experience that to live well always means limiting our freedoms, and so that we can enjoy other freedoms. Nobody gets to live without constraint. So reality just consists of limitations. We're limited by our bodies. We're limited by living in a particular place at a particular time. We're limited in many ways. People will say to us, you can do anything. You can do more than you think, perhaps. Can you fly? No. Can you time travel? No. Let's say you're diabetic. You are free to eat that piece of chocolate cake. But exercising that freedom will soon mean losing your freedom because you need medical intervention. You have a trade-off between two freedoms. You don't get to choose a life of no constraint. Nobody does. What you might get is some choice over which freedoms you exercise, which freedoms you embrace. And some freedoms aren't good for us. So we've got a picture of a whale here, I think. Now this whale is looking at this deck chair and thinking, I would really like to spend a bit of time sunbathing. This whale is constrained from sunbathing. Let's say he could exercise that freedom. He would quite quickly find that he is not free at all. In a sense, would he be free to express his sunbathing desire? Yes. But would he be fully and freely whale? Where does he express his full whaleness in all its glory? In the constraints of being in the ocean, right? There'd be a freedom there that wouldn't be good for him. As a father of 3 children, let me tell you that total freedom would be very, very bad for them. They wouldn't enjoy it. It wouldn't be good for anyone. They'd just wander around breaking stuff and being really miserable. That's what happens to children if you give them complete freedom. Or maybe I'm showing my age here. I used to play GoldenEye on the N64. I don't know whether kind of first-person shooters do this anymore. There was a cheat mode where you could kind of have all the guns, unlimited ammo, no one could hurt you. Don't know whether that happens anymore, but and I was like, oh, that's fantastic. I've got to get that. I've got to enable that cheat mode. And after about 5 minutes, it was no fun at all. Literally no fun. There was no skill, no wisdom, no technique, nothing involved. It was just boring. Curtailing freedom gives us the structure that makes life engaging and worthwhile, in some senses. Or from a whale to Elon Musk. He has so many constraints on his life. Read an article about him, like he'll work 100-hour weeks. He needs sedatives to be able to sleep. He works so hard, he can't have any kind of normal family life or relationship. He gives up so much freedom. And then see him on stage, launching a new product or a new initiative. He's got wings. He's flying. He is so free, so without boundaries. He's given up so much freedom in order to gain freedom in another part. He's chosen that. Achieving anything in life means giving up certain freedoms to get other freedoms. For me to have the freedom to know my kids means giving up my freedom to be uber successful at work. Not that I necessarily would be, but I give up the ability to work all the time and do this and do that so that I can have the freedom to know my kids. The freedom to get a job after university means curtailing your freedom to go out every night so that you can do your coursework and pass your exams. You choose. Nobody lives free of constraint. Sometimes you can choose your freedoms, and real freedom, let me suggest, is knowing which freedoms to give up and which ones to embrace and being able to make that decision. Let me give you a particular example. Relationships always require us to limit our freedoms, to find freedom within a relationship. If you always do what you want all the time, and never accept restraint, you will die quite quickly and you will die alone. Absolute freedom is toxic to relationships. I don't know who wrote it, but I know John Mayer sang it. A song called Free Falling. It's written from the point of view of somebody who's looking back at a relationship and kind of reminiscing about how good it is, how good it was, and how that person was so special. And there's still a kind of longing there, but the person who's writing the song, he's saying he wants to be free. So that relationship is now finished, and he's now just kind of free falling through life alone. He's exerted his freedom, and it's been a negative thing. And it's ruined that relationship. Love liberates us, but love confines us. I remember the day before I proposed to Heather, my wife who's here, I went on a walk and thought about things. And one of the things going through my head was, well, this is kind of it. I am now shutting the door on any other relationship of this kind in my life. And it wasn't a difficult decision, but it was real. And I needed to do that in order to have freedom in our marriage relationship. And I'm so glad I did, because within that relationship, a relationship of trust where you know each other deeply, you have freedom. Freedom to be yourself, freedom not to pretend you're someone else, freedom to fail and to be forgiven. Wonderful relational freedom that you only get by closing the door to other freedoms. Third thing to think about, we can, I think, be slaves to our freedom. If you look at the beginning of the Bible, we're told about a garden where man and woman were given this place to be and to enjoy relationship with God. And there was enormous freedom in that garden, in that place. There was only one restriction. You do not eat from the fruit of this tree. One restriction and huge freedom, but that one restriction became in their minds, you don't love me. You want to restrict me. You want to take away my freedom. I don't want your restraint. I don't want your constraint on my life. And so from then on, our desire for freedom as humans has been enslaving and toxic because it's tainted by this desire to be free from God, to be free of any restraint on us. So freedom turned from a good thing into an ultimate thing. To use Bible language, it became an idol. It wasn't about, I want to be free so that I can do this good thing. It's just, I want to be free from everything, from God, from any constraint on my life. And the person who embraces that, who says, I want to be free from everything, as I've said, they won't have relationships. They won't be able to keep a job. They won't be able to settle down to live a normal life. They will be deeply lonely and unfulfilled, and they'll be driven there by their need to be free. We can be slaves to our freedom. Now, we are all making these choices about freedom all the time. Maybe the question we should be asking is there a freedom that doesn't enslave us? Is there a freedom that is better for us? What freedoms are good for us and which ones aren't? Is there a constraint that would actually be freeing for us? I'm going to look at that passage from the book of Matthew now and ask, okay, does Christianity have anything better to offer us? Let me read those verses again. Come to me, this is Jesus speaking, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. If you look at those verses, you see Jesus is inviting us to be constrained. He says, take my yoke upon you. A yoke was something you used when you didn't have tractors. You had 2 oxen, which would plough the field, but to stop them going off in different directions, you'd put this big, heavy wooden beam on them that would tie them together so they go in the same direction. And Jesus is saying, effectively, I'm one of those. You come and be the other. You come and tie yourself to me. You come and let me lead you. Take my constraint upon you. You think, well, that's not what I want. Someone invited you to be handcuffed. Would you say yes? That's not a good thing. And being a Christian does change your life. Anyone who says otherwise isn't following Jesus. Jesus has a lot to say about how we live in a world that he's made as his creatures, about how we act in this world. But he knows the constraints that are good for us. He knows the freedoms that are good for us, and he knows the ones that will eat away at us. He's in a position to know that. But it's not just that his constraints are good for us. We see also that Jesus constrains himself for us. The gospel says that he gave up his freedom for us. He is a master who sacrifices himself. See, God didn't just create the world and let us run around and let us kind of throw off his constraints and just, say, okay, well, I'll get shot of you then. No, he said, I will take a people out of this world who will be mine, and I will stake my reputation and my honor on their well-being, on their good, on blessing them, on doing good to them. And he made promises that he could not break to us. And he bound himself up with us. He constrained himself to doing good to us. And what that meant was the God who was uncontainable by the universe, God who was unconstrained by time or by age or by space or by nature, became a man. He accepted the limitations of having a body, of needing to eat, of being hungry, of being thirsty, of needing to sleep, the constraints of only being in one time and one place at any one time. And in the end, he accepted the limitations of movement, of being nailed to a cross. Ultimate limitation. To take the cost of our attempts to be free of God. The Bible says he humbled himself to death, even to death on a cross. And that means that Jesus' constraints mean freedom for us. See there in those verses? Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. When we take his constraints, when we bind ourselves to him, we don't find demands, we don't find restlessness, this kind of striving to be better and to do good. We find rest. Jesus is the only master who won't beat us up for our failure, because he's the only one who's paid for our failure. He's the only one with whom we are free to fail, who can forgive us instead of beating us up. We're free to be, not to hide, not to pretend. Because he's gentle, he's humble in heart. It's like the best relationship, the best marriage, the best thing you could imagine, the freedom that is there. To be completely known and yet completely secure. Jesus is a better master if we'll accept his restraints. Okay, well, we've almost finished. If you're here and you wouldn't say you're a Christian, let me just take that idea of maximum freedom is maximum happiness and say, if you worship freedom, you will always feel caged. If you follow freedom, if you always try and shake off restraints, you will leave in your life a wake of relational mess. You'll never be able to settle in one thing. You'll never achieve something because you'll never know the freedom of acceptance in love. That's just how the world works. And just maybe you're aware of some sense of being weary and burdened by the pursuit of freedom. And Jesus says, come to me and find rest. And maybe you're not ready for that yet, but just think in your minds, who looks like a better master? The pursuit of my individual freedom, or Jesus who says, if you accept my restraints, you will find rest? What about if you are here as a Christian? Those of you who are students, university seems to offer a time of unparalleled freedom in your lives. It seems to offer, okay, well, here is this whole world full of free choices, and that's something I want to embrace. And it can feel like Jesus says, no. I'm going to restrict your freedom. I'm going to take all those things out of your life. It's like, well, here's freedom and here's Jesus. Remember what we've looked at here. Unlimited freedom damages us. It's not good for us. You need to ask, well, which freedom would be good for me? If I embrace that freedom, what limitations will I experience? it is in accepting the restraints, the constraints of life with Jesus that you will find rest. And so if now you are feeling that pull and feeling that Jesus just wants to constrain me, he doesn't love me, the further away from him you go, the stronger that feeling will become. The closer to him you go, the more that will go away and you will find rest. It's the other way around from what you think. Maybe here's an older Christian looking back on your life and thinking, just how much more you could have done, how much more you could be doing if it wasn't for the call of Jesus on your life. If it wasn't for the people you've committed to, if it wasn't for the things you've done for Jesus. Jesus constrained himself for you. And so to do the same for him, that is a wonderful thing. That is a beautiful thing. That is a godlike thing. To limit yourself for the flourishing of other people, that's what Jesus did for you. Well, we've got some questions to chat about on our tables. But I just want to leave us on that note. We asked, will Jesus constrain me? Will he take away my freedom? Yes, in a sense. But that's how life is. We choose the freedoms. We don't get to choose all freedoms. We choose the freedoms that are good for us. He knows the freedoms and constraints that are good for us. And we can know that because his arms were nailed open wide so that we would find freedom and so that we would find rest. So let me pray and I'll hand over back to Pete.